In the final days of February 2026, the world watched with bated breath as long simmering tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan erupted into a full-scale conflict. What began as a series of isolated border skirmishes rapidly spiraled out of control, pulling both nations into a devastating war that reshaped the geopolitical landscape of South and Central Asia. Today, we're going to unpack the critical events of that fateful week, examining the key decisions and miscalculations that led two neighboring countries down the path to open war. For months leading up to the conflict, the situation along the Durand Line had grown increasingly volatile. Sporadic clashes between border patrols were becoming more frequent and more intense. Diplomatic channels, once a reliable release valve for tensions, grew quiet. Both Islamabad and Kabul accused each other of sponsoring cross-border attacks and harboring militant groups. The rhetoric from both capitals became increasingly heated, amplified by national media and fueling public anger. International observers issued warnings, but their calls for de-escalation were lost in the rising drumbeat of war. The flashpoint occurred on February 22, 2026. Conflicting reports emerged from the mountainous border region of North Waziristan. Pakistan claimed its forces had repelled a major, coordinated incursion by militants operating from Afghan soil. Afghanistan, however, vehemently denied this, asserting that Pakistani forces had launched an unprovoked cross-border artillery barrage on civilian areas, resulting in significant casualties. To this day, the exact sequence of events remains shrouded in the fog of war, with both sides presenting vastly different narratives. But what is undeniable is that this incident became the point of no return. Within hours, the diplomatic rupture was complete. Ambassadors were recalled and borders were sealed. In a televised address to the nation, the Pakistani Prime Minister declared that the country's sovereignty had been violated and that a decisive response was necessary to protect its citizens and territorial integrity. He announced the mobilization of armed forces, framing the action as a defensive measure against persistent aggression. The speech was met with a groundswell of nationalistic fervor across Pakistan. Simultaneously, in Kabul, the Afghan leadership portrayed the incident as a blatant act of Pakistani expansionism. The Afghan government issued its own ultimatum, demanding an immediate halt to all Pakistani military operations and a full withdrawal from what it considered Afghan territory. They called upon their military to defend the motherland against foreign invasion. Rallies erupted in major Afghan cities, with citizens demanding a strong response to what they saw as an attack on their nation's honor. The international community scrambled to intervene. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, with major world powers urging restraint. The United States, China, and Russia all initiated high-level diplomatic outreach, attempting to mediate and pull both sides back from the brink. Regional players like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey also offered their services as intermediaries, deeply concerned about the destabilizing effects a regional war would have on their own security and economic interests. But these efforts were too little too late. The momentum toward conflict had become an unstoppable force. On the morning of February 25th, the first major military engagements of the war began. Pakistan launched a series of precision airstrikes targeting what it identified as militant training camps and command centers deep inside Afghanistan. This was followed by a ground offensive, with armored divisions pushing across the border at several key strategic points. The stated objective was to create a buffer zone and dismantle the infrastructure used for cross-border attacks. Afghanistan's military, though facing a technologically superior force, mounted a fierce and determined resistance. Leveraging their knowledge of the rugged terrain and drawing on decades of experience in asymmetrical warfare, Afghan forces engaged the invading army in a series of brawling battles. They employed guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and hit-and-run attacks, inflicting significant casualties and slowing the Pakistani advance. The initial stages of the war were not the swift, decisive campaign that some in Islamabad might have hoped for. Instead, it became a brutal, attritional conflict fought in the harsh mountains and valleys that have humbled empires for centuries. The escalation had an immediate and catastrophic humanitarian impact. Within the first week of fighting, tens of thousands of civilians were displaced from their homes on both sides of the border, fleeing the violence with whatever they could carry. Refugee camps swelled, and international aid agencies struggled to provide food, water, and medical care. The economic consequences were also severe. Trade routes were severed, and the costs of the war began to place an immense strain on both nations' economies, diverting crucial resources away from development and social services. The conflict also ignited a dangerous new front, the information war. Both governments engaged in a sophisticated propaganda campaign to shape the narrative, both at home and abroad. Social media became a battleground, flooded with competing claims, graphic images, and disinformation designed to demonize the other side and rally support. This digital onslaught made it incredibly difficult for the outside world to get a clear and objective picture of what was truly happening on the ground, further complicating efforts to mediate the crisis. By the end of February, the Pakistan-Afghanistan War of 2026 was in full swing. The initial border skirmishes had transformed into a multi-front conflict involving air power, ground troops, and a relentless information war. The hopes for a quick resolution had vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a prolonged and bloody struggle. The conflict had not only devastated the border regions, but also sent shockwaves across the globe, threatening to draw in other regional and international powers. The dream of peace and stability in South Asia had once again been shattered by the nightmare of war. The events of late February 2026 serve as a stark reminder of how quickly diplomatic failures can escalate into armed conflict, with devastating consequences for ordinary people. It highlights the dangers of unchecked nationalism and the critical importance of maintaining open channels of communication, even between adversaries. As we look back on this tragic chapter, the lessons learned are more relevant than ever in our increasingly fractured world. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look at a pivotal moment in recent history. Understanding the past is crucial to navigating the challenges of the future. If you found this analysis valuable, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our future content. We appreciate your support.